The medical bay aboard the Stellar Horizon space station gleamed with an almost painful perfection. Every surface sparkled with antimicrobial coating, and the air hummed with the gentle whir of sterilization fields. For Dr. Vix Thanner, this sterile sanctuary represented everything their species valued: order, precision, and absolute control. The Xylaxian doctor's 4 upper appendages moved in perfect synchronization as they organized their instruments for the 14th time that shift. Their crystalline exoskeleton reflected the soft blue light of the medical displays, creating tiny rainbows that danced across the walls. Like all Xylaxians, Vix Thanner had evolved on a world where the slightest infection could mean death, leading their species to develop an almost pathological need for cleanliness and an intense aversion to bodily fluids. The relative peace of their shift shattered when the emergency alert blazed across their neural interface. Incoming trauma patient, human, mining accident, severe trauma, ETA 2 minutes. Vix Thanner's secondary heart began to flutter. In the 3 solar cycles since the humans had established their mining operation near the station, they had somehow managed to avoid serious injury. The doctor had studied human physiology extensively but had never actually treated one. Their species' natural aversion to blood made them prefer to rely on automated systems and robotic assistance for most traumatic injuries. The medical bay doors hissed open, and 2 human medics rushed in, supporting a 3rd human between them. The patient's mining suit was torn open across the chest, revealing a horrific gash that leaked red fluid at an alarming rate. Vix Thanner's lower limbs began to tremble at the sight. Got a crushing injury from a collapsed support beam, one medic announced, helping their patient onto the examination bed. This is Commander Reza Patel, head of mining operations. The injured human looked up at Vix Thanner and, incredibly, smiled. Sorry about the mess, document. These suits are expensive too. Vix Thanner's medical training battled with their instinctive revulsion as they activated their diagnostic arrays. Please remain still, Commander. Your injury appears severe and they paused, rechecking the readings. This cannot be correct. Your pain indicators are barely registering. Commander Patel shrugged, then winced slightly. Adrenaline's probably still pumping. Besides, I've had worse paper cuts. The doctor's translator must have malfunctioned. They were looking at a wound that would have sent any Xylaxian into immediate shock, yet this human was making jokes about paper-based injuries? Your thoracic cavity has been compromised, Vix Thanner stated, trying to maintain professional composure while their lower appendages twitched anxiously. There is significant tissue damage, possible rib fractures, and you have lost approximately 12% of your blood volume. Sounds about right, Patel nodded, then attempted to sit up. Any chance we can speed this along? I've got a crew waiting on instructions about that collapsed tunnel. All 4 of Vix Thanner's hands shot out to hold the human down, their crystalline fingers clicking against the bed's surface. You must not move. Your condition is critical. Critical's a bit strong, isn't it? Patel argued, though they did settle back down. I'm still conscious, aren't I? The medical scanners continued to feed data into Vix Thanner's neural interface, and none of it aligned with their training. The human's vital signs remained surprisingly stable despite the trauma. Their pain response was minimal, and their tissue already showed signs of accelerated healing that defied conventional medical knowledge. As Vix Thanner began administering treatment through their automated systems, they found themselves fascinated despite their discomfort. The human cellular structure was incredibly resilient, their immune response was unlike anything in their medical database, and their ability to maintain consciousness and coherent conversation under these conditions was nothing short of remarkable. Your species, Vix Thanner ventured as they guided a regeneration field over the wound, appears to have unusual physiological responses to severe trauma. Patel laughed, then immediately regretted it based on their grimace. That's one way to put it. We're pretty hard to kill. Had a great-grandfather who survived falling out of a shuttle at high altitude. Broke every bone in his body but lived to complain about the hospital food for another 20 years. Vic Stanner's primary heart nearly stopped. This is considered normal for humans? More or less, Patel replied, watching with interest as their wound began to close under the regeneration field. We evolved on a pretty rough world. High gravity, lots of predators, extreme weather, you name it. Had to be tough to survive. As the treatment progressed, Vic Stanner found their professional curiosity gradually overcoming their instinctive aversion. They began asking questions about human physiological responses, healing factors, and pain thresholds. The answers they received challenged everything they thought they knew about biological resilience. By the time they finished treating Commander Patel's injuries, Vic Stanner had filled several data cores with notes about human medical anomalies. They had also developed a grudging respect for these seemingly indestructible beings who treated life-threatening injuries as minor inconveniences. Remember, they instructed as Patel prepared to leave, you must rest for at least 48 hours to allow proper healing. Sure thing, Doc, Patel agreed with a smile that suggested they had no intention of following those instructions. But if anything comes up in the mind's dash. 48 hours, Vic Stanner interrupted firmly, all four hands on their hips. Or I will be forced to report you as medically unfit for duty. As they watched their first human patient leave the medical bay, Vic Stanner realized that their perfectly ordered world had just become significantly more complicated. These humans were going to require an entirely new approach to medical care, assuming they didn't give the doctor a nervous breakdown first. The next few weeks aboard Stellar Horizon proved to be increasingly challenging for Dr. Vic Stanner. Their pristine medical bay had become a revolving door of injured humans, each case more baffling than the last. Today was proving particularly trying as they dealt with their latest patient, mining engineer Kai Rodriguez. You were exposed to raw plasma for how long? Vic Stanner's voice carried a note of disbelief as they examined the human's severely burned arm. Maybe 2 minutes. Rodriguez scratched their head with their good hand. Had to seal the leak before it took out the whole power grid. No big deal. Vic Stanner's crystalline structure flickered with stress patterns. No big deal. Direct plasma exposure should have completely vaporized your limb. The fact that you still have an arm defies all known physics. Oh, that's because of the new heat-resistant undersuits we're testing, Rodriguez explained cheerfully. They only last about 90 seconds against direct plasma, but that's usually enough time to get the job done. The doctor's lower appendages began their now familiar stress tapping against the floor. You knowingly entered a hazardous situation with protection that would fail before you could complete your task. Well, yeah. Someone had to do it. Before Vic Stanner could formulate a response to this particular brand of human logic, their neural interface pinged with multiple emergency alerts. A mining tunnel had collapsed in Section 7, and there were numerous casualties incoming. The next hour passed in a blur of activity that pushed Vic Stanner to their absolute limits. Humans streamed into the medical bay, many covered in blood and dust, yet somehow all conscious and attempting to help each other despite their own injuries. Status report. Captain Jana Walsh, the station's human commander, strode into the chaos. Despite sporting a nasty gash across their forehead, they remained focused and alert. Captain, you're injured, Vic Stanner observed, reaching for a scanner. Later, Walsh waved them off. How's my crew? The doctor's appendages flew over their diagnostic displays. 17 injured, varying degrees of severity. Crushing injuries, lacerations, pneumothorax, internal bleeding. They paused, checking their readings again. And somehow, everyone is still conscious and mobile. How is this possible? Walsh grinned, blood still trickling down their face. You should see us during a real crisis. Before Vic Stanner could process that disturbing statement, a commotion erupted from one of the treatment beds. Engineering Chief Torres had discovered that their spouse was among the injured and was attempting to leave despite having 3 broken ribs and a punctured lung. Chief Torres, return to your bed immediately. Vic Stanner's voice rose with panic. Your injuries are severe. Just patch me up quick, document Jamie needs me, Torres argued, trying to swing their legs off the bed. Jamie is receiving excellent care, Vic Stanner insisted, all 4 hands pressing Torres back down. And they are significantly less injured than you. Less injured? Torres scoffed. They've got a crushed hand. They're a precision welder, they need those fingers. The doctor's stress patterns intensified. You have a pneumothorax. Your lung is literally collapsing. Yeah, but I've got 2 lungs, don't I? Captain Walsh's laughter didn't help the situation. Dr. Vic Stanner, welcome to the joys of treating humans in crisis. We tend to get a bit focused when our people are hurt. As if to prove this point, another patient called out from across the medical bay, Hey, Doc. Since we're all stuck here anyway, any chance we could hold our maintenance planning meeting? The captain's here, and we really need to discuss those backup generator installations. Vic Stanner's crystalline structure began to emit a high-pitched resonance of pure stress. Here they were, surrounded by critically injured humans who should be in various states of shock or unconsciousness, and instead, they were trying to conduct business meetings. Attention! The doctor's voice cut through the chaos with unexpected authority. This is a medical facility, not a conference room. Everyone will remain in their assigned beds, follow treatment protocols, and refrain from attempting to work, assist others, or conduct meetings until properly discharged. Captain Walsh, please allow me to treat your head injury, or I will be forced to declare you medically unfit for command. The medical bay fell silent. Captain Walsh's grin widened. Nice spine, document metaphorically speaking, of course. They hopped onto a nearby examination bed. All right people, you heard the doctor. Full compliance with medical orders. That's a direct command. As Vic Stanner began treating the captain's injury, they noticed their stress resonance slowly subsiding. Perhaps they were finally beginning to adapt to human patients. At the very least, they were learning to be more assertive with these impossibly resilient beings. Doctor, Walsh spoke quietly as Vic Stanner sealed their head wound, I know we're not the easiest species to treat. But I want you to know that my crew trusts you. They respect your skills, even if they don't always show it by following your orders. Vic Stanner's color patterns shifted slightly, indicating embarrassment. I am learning that humans have a unique approach to medical care. And to survival in general. That's one way to put it, Walsh chuckled. We've evolved to be really, really hard to kill. Sometimes that makes us a bit cavalier about our own safety. Having a doctor who actually worries about us? That's probably good for us. As the captain spoke, Vic Stanner realized something was different. They were surrounded by blood and injury, yet their usual panic response had dulled to a manageable level. Perhaps humans weren't the only ones adapting. When the crisis finally subsided, Vic Stanner retreated to their office to update their medical logs. They had learned more about human physiology and psychology in one day than in all their previous studies combined. Humans, it seemed, didn't just survive despite impossible odds, they thrived on challenging them. The doctor's neural interface pinged with another alert. Someone in engineering was requesting medical assistance for a minor plasma torch incident. Vic Stanner's lower appendages began their stress tapping again, but this time, it was accompanied by something new, a resigned sort of fondness. These humans were going to be the death of them, but somehow, they were starting to be okay with that. The daily staff meeting in Dr. Vic Stanner's medical bay had taken an unexpected turn. Their medical team, consisting of both Xylaxian and human healthcare workers, was engaged in what humans called a heated discussion about treatment protocols. With all due respect, Dr. Lieutenant Nora Wells, the human head nurse, leaned forward in her chair, "We need to modify our triage protocols. What counts as critical for a Xylaxian isn't the same for a human." Vic Thanner's crystalline structure shimmered with frustration. "Our current protocols are based on generations of medical experience." "On Xylaxian physiology," Wells interrupted. "Look at yesterday's mining accident. You categorized Rodriguez's crushed foot as critical priority 1, while Thompson's punctured lung was priority 3. The foot injury had extensive blood loss. Vic Thanner's lower appendages tapped rapidly against the floor. "Yes, but humans can lose up to 40% of their blood volume and survive. Thompson's lung could have collapsed completely in the time we spent treating Rodriguez's foot." The doctor's color patterns shifted through various stress indicators as they processed this information. After several weeks of treating humans, they were still struggling to recalibrate their understanding of medical priorities. Their contemplation was interrupted by the emergency alert system. "Multiple casualties incoming, chemical exposure in hydroponics." When the patients arrived, Vic Thanner found their new knowledge immediately tested. 6 humans stumbled into the medical bay, their skin blistered from exposure to caustic fertilizer compounds. According to all Xylaxian medical training, these injuries should be catastrophic. Yet here was Dr. Yuki Tanaka, the head botanist, trying to give a status report between bouts of coughing. The containment system malfunctioned, most of the crew got out quickly, managed to save most of the crops. "Dr. Tanaka," Vic Thanner's voice carried a new note of authority, "please allow us to treat your injuries before discussing agricultural matters." "But the tomatoes." "The tomatoes," Vic Thanner said firmly, all 4 hands guiding Tanaka to a treatment bed, "will wait." Lieutenant Wells caught the doctor's eye and nodded approvingly as she began treating another patient. They were learning. As the medical team worked, Vic Thanner found themselves implementing their modified protocols almost instinctively. Chemical burns, severe but not immediately life-threatening for humans. Respiratory distress, higher priority. They directed their team with newfound confidence, their natural aversion to bodily fluids now tempered by experience and understanding. "Doctor," one of their Xylaxian nurses called out, their crystalline form flickering with distress, "the human patients are attempting to assist with treatment." Indeed, the less severely injured humans were trying to help bandage their colleagues, despite their own blistered hands. Vic Thanner was about to intervene when Lieutenant Wells caught their attention. "Let them help," she suggested quietly. "It's how humans cope with crisis. Fighting against it just raises their stress levels." Vic Thanner's upper appendages twisted in thought. "This is highly irregular." "Welcome to human medicine," Wells smiled. "Sometimes the best treatment isn't in any protocol manual." As they watched their human patients care for each other while receiving treatment, Vic Thanner began to understand something fundamental about the species. Humans didn't just possess extraordinary physical resilience, their psychological need to help others seemed to enhance their recovery. Later that day, as the crisis subsided, Vic Thanner found themselves reviewing their medical logs with new eyes. They had documented countless instances of humans surviving injuries that would be fatal to most species, but they had failed to note the equally remarkable way humans supported each other through recovery. Their contemplation was interrupted by a gentle knock. Lieutenant Wells entered, carrying what humans called a coffee mug. "Thought you might need this," she said, placing the mug on the desk. "It's Xylaxian nerve-calming tea. The engineering team synthesized it for you after they noticed your stress patterns during emergencies." Vic Thanner's color patterns shifted to indicate surprise and something close to emotional movement. "They noticed?" "Of course they did," Wells smiled. "Humans might seem reckless about their own health, but we're pretty observant when it comes to caring for others. Even our apparently unflappable alien doctor." As they absorbed this, Vic Thanner's neural interface pinged with a message from Dr. Tanaka in hydroponics. The botanist had apparently begun researching ways to modify their fertilizer compounds to be less caustic, specifically noting medical staff safety concerns as the primary motivation. "Lieutenant," Vix Thanner said slowly, their crystalline structure displaying thoughtful patterns, "I believe I need to revise our protocols again." "Oh?" Wells raised an eyebrow. "Yes. We need to account for not just human physical resilience, but also their capacity for mutual support. Perhaps we could implement a system that allows for supervised assistance from less injured patients?" Wells grinned. "Now you're thinking like a human doctor." "Please do not insult me," Vix Thanner replied, but their color patterns showed amusement. "I am simply adapting our practices to account for all relevant factors. Including," they added, lifting the mug of tea, "the apparent human need to care for their caregivers." As they sipped the perfectly synthesized tea, Vix Thanner realized that they were no longer just treating humans, they were beginning to understand them. It was terrifying and fascinating in equal measure, much like the species themselves. The emergency alert sounded again. "Minor plasma burns in engineering," the system announced. Vix Thanner's lower appendages began their familiar stress tapping, but now it was accompanied by a different set of color patterns, something almost like anticipation. "Shall we?" Wells asked, already moving toward the door. "Indeed," Vix Thanner replied, rising smoothly. "Though perhaps we should verify their definition of minor first." Both doctor and nurse shared a knowing look. They were learning, all of them, how to bridge the gap between their species. One medical emergency at a time. The emergency sirens aboard Stellar Horizon screamed with an urgency that made even the most seasoned crew members pause. Dr. Vix Thanner's neural interface flooded with critical alerts as they sprinted toward the medical bay, their crystalline form reflecting the pulsing red emergency lights. "Status report," they demanded, bursting through the medical bay doors. Lieutenant Wells was already prepping the trauma units. "Major explosion in mining sector 12. Multiple casualties incoming." "It's bad, Doctor." Before Vix Thanner could respond, the first wave of injured crew members arrived. The scene that followed would have sent any junior Xylaxian medical officer into catastrophic shock. Blood painted the floor in crimson streaks as miners helped carry their more severely injured colleagues. The air filled with the scent of burned flesh and the sound of pained breathing. Captain Walsh's voice crackled over the comm system, "Medical Bay, we have 37 injured. Critical structural damage to the mining sector. Emergency force fields are failing. I need," static interrupted the transmission. Vix Thanner's lower appendages began their familiar stress tapping, but something was different. Instead of overwhelming panic, they felt an unusual clarity. Months of treating these impossibly resilient humans had changed them. "Lieutenant Wells, activate all emergency medical protocols," they ordered, their four hands already moving to prepare critical care equipment. "Contact the Xylaxian medical station in Sector 4 for additional support. We'll need." A secondary explosion rocked the station. The lights flickered ominously. "Doctor." A voice called from the doorway. Chief Engineer Torres stumbled in, supporting an unconscious colleague. "The station's main power core is destabilizing. We have maybe 20 minutes before catastrophic failure." Vix Thanner's color patterns shifted rapidly as they processed this information. Their medical bay was filled with critically injured humans who couldn't be moved, but staying meant possible death for everyone. "The backup medical bay in Sector 4, they began, but Torres shook their head. "No good. We're cut off from that section. Emergency bulkheads are sealed." For a moment, Vix Thanner's crystalline structure emitted the high-pitched resonance of extreme stress. Then, suddenly, it stopped. They had made a decision. "Lieutenant Wells, begin organizing patients by mobility status. Chief Torres, I need you to help establish a secure power link to my medical systems." Their voice carried an authority that surprised even them. We're going to convert this medical bay into an emergency shelter. Dr. Wells cautioned, the amount of blood loss alone will be significant. Vic Thanner finished, their color patterns now showing grim determination. And I will deal with it. These humans have survived everything else, they will survive this too. The next 15 minutes passed in a blur of organized chaos. Vic Thanner moved between patients with unprecedented speed, their natural aversion to blood completely overshadowed by the need to save lives. They directed their team with precision, implementing emergency treatments that would have been considered impossibly risky under normal circumstances. Torres and their engineering team worked frantically to reinforce the medical bay's power systems while treating their own injuries. The human's extraordinary ability to function despite severe trauma had never been more valuable. With less than 5 minutes until projected core failure, Vic Thanner made another unprecedented decision. They accessed their emergency medical protocols and began downloading centuries of Zylaxian medical knowledge directly into their neural interface's emergency backup. Dr. Wells noticed their actions. That level of data transfer could burn out your neural pathways. Perhaps, Vic Thanner acknowledged, their structure showing signs of strain. But if we survive this, someone will need to understand how to treat both humans and Zylaxians without access to our main medical database. The station shuddered violently. Emergency lights flashed warnings about imminent power failure. In that moment, Vic Thanner did something no Zylaxian doctor had ever done. They plunged their hands directly into a pool of human blood to perform emergency surgery without automated assistance. Dr. Wells exclaimed, recognizing the significance of this action. Humanity's capacity for survival is remarkable, Vic Thanner said calmly, despite their trembling lower appendages. Perhaps it is time I demonstrated some of that same resilience. As if in response to their words, the station's shuddering suddenly ceased. Captain Walsh's voice, strained but triumphant, came over the emergency channel. Engineering teams have stabilized the core. Repeat, core is stable. Beginning damage assessment. The medical bay erupted in cheers from those conscious enough to celebrate. Vic Thanner continued working, their hands steady despite being covered in human blood. Dr. Wells approached them after the immediate crisis had passed. Are you all right? Vic Thanner examined their blood-stained crystalline appendages with an almost academic interest. I find myself experiencing an unusual physiological response, Lieutenant. My natural aversion to blood appears to have been superseded by what humans would call determination. Wells smiled. Sounds like you might be developing some human traits, Doctor. That, Vic Thanner replied, their color patterns showing both amusement and exhaustion, would be a thoroughly alarming development. They paused, looking around at their injured but surviving patients. Though perhaps not an entirely unwelcome one. As they began the long process of treating the remaining injuries, Vic Thanner realized that something fundamental had changed. They had faced their greatest fear not by overcoming it, but by finding something more important, the drive to protect and heal, regardless of species or circumstance. Their lower appendages still tapped anxiously against the floor, but now it seemed more like a rhythm of determination than fear. After all, they had survived their worst nightmare. What else could possibly frighten them now? The emergency alert pinged again. Minor antimatter containment issue in engineering. Vic Thanner's color patterns flickered with what might have been a sigh. Some things, it seemed, would never change. 6 months after the mining sector crisis, Stellar Horizon's medical bay had undergone a transformation almost as dramatic as its chief medical officer. The once pristine, sterile environment now featured a unique blend of Zylaxian precision and human practicality. Dr. Vic Thanner stood at their workstation, their crystalline form displaying calm, steady patterns as they reviewed the latest medical research data. The sight of their human patients no longer triggered stress responses, and their notorious tapping had reduced to an occasional habit rather than a constant anxiety response. Lieutenant Wells entered with a group of new medical staff, both human and Zylaxian. The exchange program candidates have arrived. Vix Thanner turned to face the group, noting the nervous flickering of their fellow Xylaxians and the barely contained excitement of the human medics. Welcome to what humans would call the front lines of xenomedicine. Is it true, one young Xylaxian medical officer asked, their color patterns showing clear anxiety, that you performed surgery without automated assistance? In direct contact with human blood? When necessary, Vix Thanner replied calmly. You will find that treating humans requires adaptability. As if on cue, the medical bay doors slid open to admit their latest patient. Commander Patel, their very first human patient, strode in with a piece of mining equipment lodged in their shoulder. Hey, Doc, Patel grinned, apparently unbothered by their predicament. Don't suppose you could help me with this? Got a meeting in 20 minutes. The new Xylaxian staff members emitted collective stress resonance, but Vix Thanner merely gestured to an examination bed. Commander, we have discussed the importance of proper safety protocols in the mining sector. In my defense, Patel settled onto the bed, I was using the safety protocols. The equipment just had other ideas. As Vix Thanner began treatment, they noticed the exchange students watching with a mixture of horror and fascination. Observe, they instructed, human pain tolerance and healing capabilities far exceed our standard medical parameters. However, this does not mean we should encourage their tendency toward reckless behavior. I resent that characterization, Patel protested good-naturedly. We're not reckless, we're efficient. You have mining equipment embedded in your shoulder. Only a little bit. Lieutenant Wells stifled a laugh as the new Xylaxian staff's stress patterns intensified. This is why we're revolutionizing emergency medicine, she explained to them. Traditional approaches don't account for human resilience or Xylaxian precision. Together, we're creating something new. Indeed, the medical bay now featured innovative hybrid technologies, regeneration fields calibrated specifically for human physiology, diagnostic systems that could simultaneously process both species' medical parameters, and treatment protocols that incorporated both Xylaxian thoroughness and human adaptability. Your species, Vix Thanner addressed the human exchange medics while removing the equipment from Patel's shoulder, has taught us that medical care is not merely about maintaining perfect conditions and following rigid protocols. Sometimes, it requires what you call thinking outside the box. And your species, Patel added, watching with interest as their wound was sealed, taught us that maybe we should occasionally consider safety measures before charging into danger. Occasionally, Wells emphasized with a knowing smile. The demonstration was interrupted by an alert from the engineering section. Chief Torres' voice came through, Medical Bay, we've got a situation with the new reactor cooling system. Nothing serious yet, but... Define nothing serious, Vix Thanner requested, already gathering emergency supplies. Well, it's only a little bit radioactive. The new Xylaxian staff began their stress tapping in unison, but Vix Thanner remained calm. Lieutenant Wells, please brief our new team members on radiation treatment protocols. I will handle this situation. As they prepared to leave, one of the human exchange medics asked, Doctor, how do you manage to stay so calm now? The reports say you used to be terrified of human injuries. Vix Thanner's color patterns shifted to show what humans might recognize as wry amusement. I discovered something more important than fear, curiosity. Humans have survived everything from antimatter exposure to complete atmospheric decompression. As a medical professional, how could I not want to understand and learn from such remarkable resilience? Also, Patel added, sliding off the examination bed, we kind of wore them down with our charm. You wore me down with your statistically improbable survival rates, Vix Thanner corrected, but their color patterns showed fondness. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to prevent our engineering team from adding radiation poisoning to their already impressive list of survival stories. As they left the medical bay, Vix Thanner reflected on how much had changed. They had begun their posting on Stellar Horizon terrified of human blood and convinced that their species' medical protocols were the pinnacle of healthcare. Now, they were leading a revolution in xenomedicine, teaching others that the best treatments often came from combining different perspectives. Their lower appendages still tapped occasionally when things got stressful, but now it was more like keeping time to the rhythm of the station's perpetual chaos. After all, they had learned that sometimes the most remarkable discoveries came from embracing what terrified you. "Doctor," Torres' voice crackled over the comm, "you might want to hurry. The radiation's doing something interesting to the coffee maker." Vix Thanner's color patterns rippled with what might have been laughter. Some things would never change, and somehow, that was exactly as it should be.